Patriots may be the single most important weapon system for Ukraine at the moment. As Ukraine pounds Russian infrastructure on an almost nightly basis, it seems that the Kremlin's only response is to fire drones and ballistic missiles at Kyiv. Ukraine can thin out the drone assaults well enough, but the ballistic missiles are another story. Many weapon systems have effective substitutes. However, Patriots stand on their own. Hence why Zelensky has persisted in courting Trump despite a troublesome second term. Well, it seems that Zelensky's persistence has paid off. Yesterday, at the annual NATO summit, Trump announced that he will give Ukraine the thumbs up to begin producing Patriots within the country. Yet this whole situation raises more questions than it answers. Plus, a whole bunch of other interesting things happened at the summit. So today, let's start by unpacking the whole Patriot saga. Then we will examine how NATO spending has changed since last year's Hague summit. That provides a good transition to the curious case of Spain, which has returned to Trump's crosshairs. Then we will look at the summit's final declaration, before finishing with the curious case of the next summit. But let's begin with the Patriots announcement. This one is weird because it really was not much of an announcement at all. Rather, Trump and Zelensky were doing their standard 30-minute press junket as the opening to a longer private meeting. In contrast to 2 Februaries ago, the mood was downright friendly. They even joked about the Oval Office meltdown, which has framed their entire relationship since then. Trump set up Zelensky for the joke of the summit, asking him whether he would be interested in meeting in Moscow for peace talks. Zelensky responded that it would be dangerous, not because he might drink the wrong cup of tea, but rather because Ukrainian drones were flying all around the city. This drew laughs from around the room. But the joke came from a deathly serious place. Putin is reportedly spending most of his time outside of Moscow, perhaps in part because of that danger. Trump continued with compliments on Ukraine's long-range strike program. As a general point here, Trump respects strength. The Oval Office meltdown from February 2025 not only represented a diplomatic low point, but it was arguably also the military low point for Ukraine. Although the comment about cards was silly, it came from a place of truth. Trump wants to back a winner, and the long-range strike campaign, bolstered by U.S. intelligence on the locations of Russian defenses, could indeed make Ukraine a winner. As for the Patriots, the announcement was actually an offhand comment. A question from a reporter asked whether Trump would allow Europe to expand Patriot production. That is when Trump told the room that one of the agenda items for his private conversation afterward with Zelensky would be about granting a license to Ukraine for Patriot production. We then observed the absurdity of these media scrums. This was an incredibly consequential announcement. Yet, immediately, the next question pivoted to the end of the Iran ceasefire. More than 10 minutes passed before there was a short follow-up regarding the licensing procedure. Trump's details were vague, which is why the announcement raised more questions than it answered. 2 other countries currently hold a license to produce Patriots. Japan has its production lines online, while Germany is scheduled to start production next year. Notably, it took Japan 2 years from the initial licensing to the first Patriots coming off the assembly line. Meanwhile, Germany broke ground in 2024, meaning that we are looking at 3 years if everything stays on schedule. Consequently, you may expect there to be a long time gap before Ukraine starts producing its own. And given the rate that people think that Putin is done, one wonders whether they will even come online before the end of the conflict. That said, I think that these timelines are misleading. When you are currently at peace, it makes sense to be careful with your production process. You do not want imperfections in all of your stockpiled missiles without you even realizing it until it is time to actually use them. Throw in some standard Western bureaucracy and regulation, and that is why these things take years. In contrast, Ukraine could not care less about bureaucracy and regulations. Even Patriots with a relatively high fail rate are fine to put into action, because the alternative is that a Russian ballistic missile hits one of your buildings. Ukraine would much rather have a 50-50 chance of shooting one down now than wait 3 years and have a guaranteed success rate. What may prove to be the more difficult holdup is the licensing procedure. Normally, weapons licensing like this begins with the importer paying the exporter an upfront licensing fee. Then there will be further payments to contractors to come in and help set up the systems, royalties for each unit produced, and, most importantly, sales of the input goods for the final production. For complex weapon systems like Patriots, the recipient country tends not to produce the whole thing. Part of this is to allow the licensor to shut off production if it wants to. However, the bigger part is that full coverage is simply infeasible. The producing country might not have the capability to manufacture specialized components such as microchips. Thus, as it stands now, I believe that a Patriot will come off of Ukraine's assembly lines in the future. What I do not know is what Ukraine will be fabricating on site. I also do not know who will be paying for any of this. Ukraine does not have the money to do it. I doubt that Trump was doing this out of the goodness of his heart. That would leave Europe, likely through the NATO Pearl Initiative. I suspect that many capitals would be happy to subsidize the effort, hoping to procure Patriots from Ukraine post-war. There are no details on that so far, though. One final point is that Ukraine will have to protect the production facility. That raises the question of whether this would all be better done in, say, Poland, which Russia would not want to bomb so as to avoid triggering Article 5. I suspect that part of this is that Ukraine looks forward to the post-war situation, where it could then export the Patriots. Then again, if Ukraine is trying to speedrun the any % Patriot production category, there may need to be significant retrofitting post-war to ensure that the Patriot supply lives up to the rest of NATO standards. In any case, these are details. The headline for Ukraine is positive. It was a great summit for Zelensky, which continues the great year that he is having more generally. Moving on, I think that we can put this in the context of the broader military spending situation inside of NATO. Here is a map of member states listing their current military spending as a percentage of GDP. Russia and Ukraine are there for reference. Iceland is so small that it does not have a military to spend anything on. But the island does contribute in other ways, it is a fun place to visit, and you should try going there sometime. Anyway, you will recall that back in 2014, the Allies agreed to spend 2% of GDP on defense. After tons of foot-dragging, including after the Russian invasion of Ukraine began, last year's Hague Summit saw an increase in the commitment to 5% of GDP, with 3.5% as core defense spending, and an additional 1.5% on miscellaneous military infrastructure. Heading back to the map, this is specifically the core defense spending part. 5 countries have already hit the target well before the decade deadline. Lithuania at 5.33%, Estonia at 5.10%, Latvia at 4.92%, Poland at 4.68%, and Greece at 3.65%. A 6th country, Denmark, is right on the fringe at 3.49%. This is a big part of why the atmosphere at the summit was so upbeat this year. Nonetheless, a bunch of countries were still treading water at or near 2%. France might be the most notable of these at 2.22%. Remember that France has a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, but it is not spending like it does. This may be a bit apples to oranges, but Ukraine has 1/30 of the economy of France, and yet is currently outspending France militarily. Slovenia is the only country sitting below the Wales Pledge. You might be surprised to hear this now, because you would think if someone was so far behind, Trump would be screaming at the top of his lungs about it. Yet he has remained silent. No, it is not because Melania has convinced him to go easy on her homeland. Instead, it is because there is no political disagreement in Slovenia regarding the Hague Commitment. A new government is coming in and fully plans to raise spending accordingly. Hence, no one is worried, and there is very little discussion about it. Indeed, if you look at the changes in defense spending as a percentage of GDP, you can see that there has been a lot of progress made over the last year. Many countries are showing more than 10% year-over-year growth, with the Baltics especially eager to get moving. And that is really saying something, because the Baltics were already spending a lot last year. However, there is one notable exception that remains: Spain. Let's look into that as the third part of today's conversation. Back at the Hague Summit, Spain was the only country that refused to declare its intention to spend 5% of GDP on defense. You may recall that one of the things that I learned while at the Hague Summit was that 5% was not a random number. Instead, NATO's military planners calculated what they thought they needed to hold back Russia, and then used the cost of that metal to back out the percentage of GDP that would cover everything. Spain's response was that it could produce its share of that deterrent at 2%, making 5% superfluous. We are still waiting to see what joker Spain has that gives a 2.5x multiplier to Spanish-specific military production. And here we are today with Spain at exactly 2%. Trump's frustration with Spain, though, received more attention due to the Iran war. The Spanish government refused to allow the United States to use Spanish bases as a part of the logistics operations for military deployments in the Gulf. All this came to a head at the summit when Trump said that the United States was going to cut off trade with Spain. Well, a common response to this threat in the online commentary is that trade with the European Union does not work like that. Specifically, the European Union has a piece of legislation known as the Anti-Coercion Instrument, which came on the books in 2023. Back then, its implied purpose was to enfeeble China's ability to leverage trade against individual EU members. In theory, the instrument forces external countries to treat all European Union nations the same. Thus, if the United States cuts off trade with Spain, then the European Union cuts off trade with the United States entirely. Let me first note that Trump made a similar threat a few months ago and never followed through. It is fully possible that we will see a repeat of that now. However, the anti-coercion instrument is not as simple as people make it out to be. There is no automatic implementation of the mechanism. Rather, it requires a supermajority vote inside of the European Union. Specifically, 55% of members with at least 65% of the EU population. It will likely take months of bureaucratic shuffling to go through as well, because that is exactly how European institutions work. In any case, it is far from a sure thing. Other EU members may worry that the United States will retaliate to their support for the instrument. Yet others may be annoyed with Spain over the military spending, causing part of the issue. They would, essentially, be blowing up their own trade relations with the United States to protect Spain's right to not contribute to the alliance. And if you think that the instrument will be a sure thing, ask yourself this: why does it require a vote at all? The reason is that member states do not want to be held hostage by bad policies from fellow member states. Is this one of them? We will see. The flip side is that European countries are more supportive of Spain's decision regarding the Iran war. Every time that Trump ties Spanish trade policy to that, he further sabotages his ability to coerce Spain. Meanwhile, Spain's response has been the right one, to basically ignore Trump and his threats. More countries could probably learn from that example. Speaking of which, Trump also rehashed the Greenland controversy at the summit. This time around, Denmark has treated that absurdity for what it is and left it with a much more muted response. Trump has no real ability to do anything there, and so it is better to just let empty threats lie. To get close to wrapping things up for today, we should talk about how they wrapped up the summit with their annual declaration. I would describe the contents as business as usual, except for a second year in a row, the document's contents were shorter. Point 1 reaffirmed the unbreakable Article 5, as they always like to do. Point 2 was describing the satisfactory progress toward the Hague Commitment, as we have described earlier today. Point 3 discussed the transfer of primary responsibility of European security to European countries, with help from the United States to coordinate that process. This has been happening behind the scenes for more than a year now, even as the media reports get bogged down in the controversies. Point 4 unambiguously declares that Ukraine remains a critical part of transatlantic security. Point 5 says that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and that there must be freedom of navigation inside of the Strait of Hormuz. That sounds like something Trump planted inside of the declaration, but these have always been European policies as well. Point 6 was the boilerplate "thank you" to the host. The abbreviated format of this document is often ascribed to Trump. NATO wants to keep things simple for him, and, in fact, that is why these summits are no longer full-week affairs. But before you tap the sign, these documents have real signaling value. They are not mere declarations of how resolved and strong the alliance is. Rather, they are an ordering of alliance priorities. And you can credibly signal that you care more about X than you do about Y. The problem is that if you signal that you care about 80 things, you ultimately signal that you care about nothing. So regardless of what the Trump effect is, the pared down document is useful for understanding the alliance's core goals. Finally, we will end today by discussing what was not at the end of the summit declaration. Let me read you the very last sentence from there. We look forward to our next meeting. Not, we look forward to our next meeting in 2027 in Albania. There are some reports that NATO will skip an annual summit next year to prevent Trump from rocking the boat. That may very well be the intent, and that may very well be what happens. But if the current trajectory of military commitments continues, they may still want to hold one so they can repeat the reaffirmation of the sanctity of Article 5. Closing out today, you may have deduced that I did not travel to the summit this year. It is not because when the Secretary General booted me off stage last year, he was permanently kicking me out of all NATO activities. I just had a scheduling conflict that prevented me from traveling this year. I will say it is interesting observing these from the outside versus the inside. When you are there, you cannot really see the forest through the trees. I have a much better understanding of what happened at this year's summit, even though I am thousands of miles away. The difference is that you cannot hammer home critical details like where the 5% number came from when you are not there to follow up on that type of nuance. Meanwhile, there is never any nuance at the end of these videos. It is usually just me reminding you of something great, like the geopolitics helpline over on my secondary channel. You can check it out by clicking the playlist here. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.